So today we're gonna talk about the Elastic Stack. Elastic Stack is an all-in-one platform for analyzing data. And of course it has many uses in cybersecurity and data analysis. So first, before we start, this video is part of the SOC Level 2 in TryHackMe. And the room that we will be going over is the Logstash data processing unit. But I want to expand through the subject. Before we dive through the room, let's first talk about the Elastic Stack, the components of the Elastic Stack, how they all work together to form one component, and then we will take examples on how to configure various components to start analyzing data, whether for the purpose of data analysis or for the purpose of analyzing cybersecurity incidents. Okay, so let's first go over the main three components of the Elastic Stack. The first component is called the Logstash. The second component is the Elasticsearch. And the third component is Kibana. Now, I have covered one scenario where we analyzed VPN logs as part of a cyber incident. You can watch the video here, VPN logs, investigation and data analytics with Elastic Stack. I'm going to put this video in the description so you can find it easily. You can watch this video after we complete the Logstash room, but if you don't want, if you're already familiar with Elastic Stack, you can also watch this video. I've also covered the basics of Elastic Stack. All right, let's go back. So let's explain the purpose of each one of them. So Logstash, it's the component of the Elastic Stack that is responsible of doing three things. The first one is data ingestion. So data ingestion is the process of ingesting data, taking the data from a specific data source. So data ingestion requires us to specify what is called as, so here let's draw this arrow, and we want here a data source. Data source is responsible for feeding the Logstash with data. Now, data sources can be many. One of them could be a simple log file. A log file can be a data source. TCP device can be a data source. A firewall can be a data source. So once we define the data source, we can then tell the Logstash that we have a data source, and then Logstash will be ready to ingest or start the data ingestion process. Now, all of this is facilitated by the use of a plugin. The plugin used for the process of data ingestion is called input plugin. Oh, I don't know why I'm making a lot of typos today, but it's called input plugin. There are many input plugins that are tailored to various use cases, and they all depend, or they all fit the type of the data source that we intend to use. For example, there's a plugin for ingesting data from a log file called File Plugin, right? And likewise for the other data sources. So for every data source, there is a specific input plugin that we can actually use to ingest the data, right? So now we know that data ingestion relies on the use of input plugins. Okay. Now, after the input is defined, the next thing we need for the Logstash to become fully functional is the data processing. Okay, so data processing is facilitated by the use of another sort of plugins. It is the filter plugins. Filter plugins allow us to normalize and transform the data received from the data sources. And there are various plugins to treat various sorts of data. For example, there are plugins that treat or actually normalize or process data in CSV. There are plugins to transform data in JSON, so on and so forth. So there are many plugins that fit all sorts of data coming from data sources. So to process the data coming from data sources, we need the filter plugins, and we can choose the filter plugins from the documentation of the Elastic Stack. I'm going to show you guys all the filter plugins. Now we have ingested the data, and now we are actually finished processing the data. The last thing we want to do is to use the process called the output or destination. Here we set the destination that will receive the processed data, right? Now in data analytics, it's actually the same. It works the same as the sales journey. So basically in the customer journey, you have the awareness. This is completely out of the scope of this video, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Awareness, and then you have the consideration. Then you have conversion. This is the sales funnel. This is called this, or the customer journey, right? Likewise, in data analytics, we have a journey. The journey starts with data ingestion, then data processing, and then we set the destination where we want to send all of these processed piles of data. So we do that in the Logstash. Logstash, we set the destination, and likewise, we need to use the what's called the output plugins. In the output plugins, we specify where we want to send the data. For example, we can send the data to Elasticsearch, which we will talk about. We can send the data to simply a CSV file, another log file, right? We can choose where we want to send the data. Now we have explored the Logstash. Let's now talk about the Elasticsearch. So in Elasticsearch, the process is simple. What we do in Elasticsearch, first, we receive data from what? Or let's draw another direction for the arrow. We receive the data from the Logstash. And next, what we do here in Elasticsearch, we analyze and search. So as a data analyst, or even as a cybersecurity incident responder, you will start working with Elasticsearch to analyze data using, guess what? Queries. So using queries, we can search, analyze the data, extract pattern and insights. The last component is the Kibana. The Kibana is tightly connected to Elasticsearch, which is the component for data visualization. We will be able to tell a story, right? To tell the stakeholders, or to extract some sort of charts, bar charts, to be able to understand the data more and extract insights. So these are the components of the Elastic Stack. How they can be used? You can use them in data analytics, or you can use them in cybersecurity. Now, so far the process makes more sense from the perspective of data analytics. However, in cybersecurity, we can still rely on Elastic Stack to do what specifically? To monitor and analyze. Let's go back to Splunk. So I have actually created many videos on Splunk, and there is also a course that I created on Splunk and how to use Splunk for analyzing cyber incidents. Likewise in Elastic Stack, if you remember in Splunk, we configured what is called the forward agent, forwarder, and then indexer, and then the search head. These are the main components of Splunk. And if you remember correctly, the forwarder was responsible for defining the data source and sending the data to the indexer. The indexer stores the data, and searcher, you can start analyzing and searching the data. So in Splunk SIEM, most of the time, we were ingesting the logs either through manual upload of log files or through a listener. So we would set up a listener on the Splunk machine to listen on all the incoming logs from the firewall or from any machine that generates logs. After we gather the logs, we start the analysis. Likewise, Elastic Stack can work exactly the same way. We can configure Logstash here. Okay, the Logstash can be configured to listen for incoming data coming from various data sources. Okay, and then we can start the search and analyze and visualization with Kibana and Elasticsearch. In the next part of this video, we're going to go over the installation of Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana, and we will take an example of how to fully configure Elasticsearch to listen for or to ingest logs from a CSV file and view them in Kibana. Okay, so I strongly recommend you guys to go over this room, Logstash Data Processing Unit. It has all what you need to get started in installing and configuring Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And it has great examples on how to configure Logstash to ingest various data sources. So for that reason, I'm going to go over this room and we're going to use the material laid down by the authors of this room. Don't forget to create an account in TryHackMe if you haven't done this, and remember that this room is not free, so you have to be subscribed to be able to deploy the machine and practice the concepts laid down here. Okay, so what we're gonna do first thing we're gonna do is to show you guys the documentation page of Logstash. This is where you need to take a look at the plugins, and this is where you need to actually visit in order to create the input, filter, and output plugins. Remember that these plugins are necessary to be configured in order to start or in order to make Logstash fully operational and functional. So we will be using this page to take a look at the rules and the required parameters for the plugins. And this is the output plugin. I'm gonna also go over this, how to configure the output plugin to send the logs to the Elasticsearch and then be able to view them with Kibana. Okay, so what is the first thing we need to do? First thing we need to do is to install it. So after we deploy the machine, first let's log into the attached user. This is the IP address. And then we're gonna have to input the password. Then we go to Home, Tools, and we have the three components, Logstash, Kibana, and Elasticsearch. We will start the installation of the first component, Logstash. Or let's first start with Elasticsearch. Let's have Elasticsearch and Kibana up and running, and then we configure the Logstash later. So cd Elasticsearch, and this is the T package file that you first see when you finish downloading the product. So we need first to install the or depackage the file. The installation of that, let's see the command. This is the Elasticsearch node file, and let me first search. Yeah, this is the command. We're gonna first depackage the file or install the package with this command. It requires elevated privileges. That's understandable. So sudo, the password is already given. After the installation is finished, it's worth taking a look at the output. So first we have to note down the user and password. This line, the generated password for the Elastic built-in super user is this. It's gonna have to take this and copy it. And then let's take a look at these lines. Reset the password of the Elastic built-in super user with. If you want to reset the password, that's the command. And if you want to generate an enrollment token for Kibana, that will come later when we want to use Kibana. So when we install Kibana and we start to learn how to access the interface, we have to generate an appropriate token for Kibana. First, we generate the token here using this command, and then we're going to log into Kibana using the same username and password shown here. So the password is this, and username is Elastic, and they can be both used to log into Kibana and Elasticsearch. Okay, what's the other thing? So let me have this over here. I'm gonna copy it somewhere temporarily. I'm gonna put it here at the very top. Okay, right, what else we have? If you want to restart Elasticsearch, we can use these commands, especially when we change the configurations. All right, so now we have installed Elasticsearch. We want Elasticsearch to start when the system or when the server boots up. So to do that, we're gonna head over to Elasticsearch and execute these commands to enable the service first. As an analyst, the password, okay, so I'm gonna exit this because probably, oh no, not that. Okay, I'm gonna log in one more time, head to home, Elastic, okay, and here we're going to sudo. Remember all the time to execute these commands in an elevated mode. Password for analyst. Okay, and then we configure Elasticsearch to start when the system starts. Right, so now Elasticsearch is installed properly. The next thing you want to do is to do a small tweak on the configuration files of Elasticsearch. Specifically, we want to take a look at the main configuration file. we're gonna go to etc Elasticsearch, and we note down permission denied. Okay, we need to elevate the privilege one more time and cd to etc Elasticsearch, and then we're going to take a look at this file, Elasticsearch YAML. This is the main configuration file, and this is where we configure all the things about Elasticsearch: the network settings, the configuration settings, the storage settings, so on and so forth. So nano elastic, and what we want to do here is to configure the IP and port. To do that, we're gonna need to scroll down and uncomment this line. The HTTP port, it's gonna be your preferred port. We're gonna leave this as is. And the network host, we're gonna, since we're running this on the machine, the same machine, we're gonna type this as localhost. Okay, we save. And then we want to do is to restart Elasticsearch. So we set the IP to localhost and the port. Now we want to restart. Let's execute the restart. Okay. I'm gonna remove the sudo because we are already root. Okay. Now Elasticsearch is fully functional. The next thing we want to do is to install Kibana. So cd home tools Kibana, and then we're going to execute d package -i to install Kibana. So after Kibana is installed, the next thing we want to do is the same thing we have done with the Elasticsearch. We want Kibana to start when the server starts. We're going to execute a series of commands. And then okay. And now let's check on the status of the service. So it is active. Fine. What's the next thing we want to do? The next thing we want to do is to configure how we're going to access Kibana. Kibana is a GUI interface. We're going to need to configure the IP and port. Same thing we did with Elasticsearch. So cd etc Kibana. And we have Kibana YAML, the main configuration file. I'm always... Yep. Okay, so the server port is by default 5601. So we're gonna uncomment this, and we're gonna uncomment the server host. Since we want this to be accessed from the attacker machine, we want to use 4 zeros. And that's all there is to do with Kibana for now. And then we're gonna restart. Okay, next thing we want to do is to access Kibana from the browser. So the IP address is given. Okay, so we're not loading up Elastic Stack. Now the enrollment token. Okay, going back to the terminal, we're going to generate the token. Remember, when we first installed Elasticsearch, I told you guys to keep the output as is. So here with this command, we're going to generate the enrollment token. That is fine. So copying the token now, heading over Kibana, and we configure Elastic. So look at this, connect to IP and port 9200. What's that? This is Kibana connecting to the main Elasticsearch we configured earlier. That's why it's always recommended to install Elasticsearch first and then Kibana. If you want to change this, you can click on configure manually, but for now we're going to configure Elastic. The verification code. So the verification code can be generated again using this command. I'm going to head back to the terminal and execute the command that generates the verification code. So it is 614052. 614052. Now it's expected for us to be ready to log in. I'm gonna log in with the same credentials we configured when we installed Elasticsearch. That's the password I kept for now. Okay, let's save for now. And now we are logging into Kibana. Now we are ready to search, analyze, and visualize data. Okay. Welcome to Elasticstack integrations. We're not gonna add any integrations for now. You can click on explore on my own. Okay, that is very great. So here on the menu on the left hand side, we can go to dashboard. We can start analyzing with enterprise search, and we can explore the various components. Now we can dedicate an entirely separate video for exploring the various components of the Elasticsearch, but for now today we can only explore the component that is related to searching and analyzing the data. So we click on discover, and here it's asking us to add the data to get started. One of the suggestions here is to use Elastic Agent to collect data and build out analytics solutions. By clicking on add integrations, we can search for any available integrations that are available so we can start collecting the data. But for now, we're going to use the Logstash, which is the intended way of using the complete Elastic stack efficiently. So we're going to go back to dashboard. Okay. Now, the part where we actually tackle the most important task, which is collecting the data. So for now, we're going to close the browser. We don't want to add unnecessary load on the machine. Okay, back to the terminal. cd to home Logstash. Tools, Logstash. Okay, now we configure Logstash. D package-i Logstash. So now Logstash is installed. Let's next add Logstash to the startup menu. Enable the service. Starting the service. And checking on the status to make sure everything is up and running smoothly and seamlessly. Okay, now it is active. Great. Next thing you want to do is to configure Logstash. But what there is to configure in Logstash, we already talked about this. The data sources, from where we want to ingest and collect the data. The processing, how we want to treat the collected data. And lastly, where to send the collected data. Now, for the scenario of this video, we're going to choose to send the data to the already installed Kibana if we don't face any problems with the machine resources. If we face problems with the machine resources being limited to use Kibana on top of what we have already installed, we're gonna send the logs to just another file or to store them locally. Okay, let's go now to etc logstash and here have a look at the configurations. So most important configuration file is logstash YAML, and we have the directory conf_d. Logstash YAML is the main configuration file where you configure various options such as the auto check on the configurations every 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, or and the configuration file here where we're gonna store the configuration files that will actually perform the data processing triad: ingestion, filtering, and then sending the data to the or deploying the data to the Elasticsearch. Okay, let's have a look at the Logstash now. So settings can be specified either in hierarchical form, pipeline. So we want to take a look at, let's scroll down, the pipeline configurations. Yeah, so pipeline ordered auto, this is the ordering of the pipelines. We don't want to configure this for now. Yeah, config reload automatic. We're going to configure the pipeline or Logstash to be automatically reloaded to check on the configuration files. So we're going to put this as true. And there is another one. We define the interval. Okay, so the interval can be 3 or 4 or 5. For me, I'm going to configure this to 3. So we're going to check on the configuration files every 3 seconds for any changes. So we're going to uncomment this line as well. Save. And the next thing we're going to do is to restart. Okay. Now we want to start configuring the Logstash to receive or to ingest data. For that, we're going to go to conf.d. This is the directory where it holds all the configuration files. Okay, we're going to create a sample configuration file to achieve the process of data processing, right? So let's create a sample configuration file named as logstash.conf. Oh, nano logstash.conf. All right, so how do we start? That's where the plugins come into play now. Let's go to the documentation of Logstash. So first we want to start, let's go back to the drawing here. We want to start with the input plugin. The input plugin or the input plugins are actually there or created to define the data source. So in our case, the data source is a simple CSV file. So let's look for the input plugins. We click on input plugins, and here we want an input plugin that these are the input plugins, as you can see, guys. So we're going to click on file, an input plugin that ingests data based off a log file. You see the description, and more importantly, we want to check the parameters required to configure this. So there are 2 parameters required: host and path. Host, the name of the Logstash host that processed the event, and the full path to the log file from which the event originates. All right, let's do that. Let's have a quick look here. So we're gonna, this is a sample configuration file. but doesn't necessarily fit the purpose of the configuration file we are creating now. But we're gonna first copy the syntax, or if you don't have this, you can scroll down and have a look at examples. So scrolling down, we see, let's see if there are examples laid down here. Yeah, this is an example. An example use of the plugin file. We're gonna copy this and we're gonna go back and paste it here. Alright, we want to make some changes on this. So the options, scrolling up. Yeah, the setting, we want to configure the file path. So the path is required. As you can see, not all the parameters are required. Some of them are not required. So the only required one is the path. We want to define the path of the file. So what is the file we want to define? Let's see here. Yeah, scrolling up. So instead of ID here, we're gonna use path. Alright, so now we define the data source. The data source will be the authentication logs located under var log auth.log. So we want to ingest the authentication logs of this machine. What are other options or parameters we can configure? Let's see here. We want to configure the start position, where the logs start, or where we want to start the ingestion of the logs. It's the beginning of the file or the end of the file. We're going to define this as the beginning. So I'm going to copy this for speed, and I'm going to go here. The start position will be beginning. Yeah, so this will be here. And here we have double quote. Okay. Now we define the input. The next thing we want to do is to define the rules for processing the data. Now this is a log file. What we want to do, we want to define what we want to filter. Let's go to a sample filtering plugin. So going back here, these are input plugins. We want to take a look at filter plugins. Okay, these are the filter plugins. For authentication logs, it's very crucial to process the timestamp of the log entry and the message. So here, we process the timestamp, we match a specific date, and we put a target in a timestamp. For example, in this log file or in this configuration file, we use the date. So if you look for the date here, this plugin parses dates from fields to use as the Logstash timestamp for an event. If you take a look here at the date and scrolling all the way down to the configuration files or required parameters. So see, none of them are required. Scroll down, we can see examples. So we mentioned the word or the keyword date to indicate that we want to use the date plugin to process the logs. And then we use the match to specify the format. Now, if you want to use other parameters and you want to know how to use it, you can just click on the related parameter. And it will bring up or to bring you to the line where it specifies the instructions on how to use it. The target parameter, for example, the value type is string and the default value is at timestamp. Store the matching timestamp into the given target field. Okay, now remember, if you want to process the data successfully, it's worth taking a look at the authentication log file. So for now, let's first create the plugin. So filter plugin, we're using filter plugin. and the plugin name is date and I'm going to copy these lines. Okay, let's adjust the indentation first. Okay, so what's going on here? Here in match, we are matching those fields, the message and the timestamps, and then we are using the target, as explained earlier, to store this in the default field at timestamp. So that's it for the date plugin. And the last thing we want to do is to use an output plugin. An output plugin that sends the output to Elasticsearch. So to do that, we're gonna use, let's see, an example. Yeah, this is an example. This is already an example, but I'm going to explain, guys, no worries. Let's copy that. All right, now let's go to output plugins. Output plugins, here they are, and we want to send the output to Kibana or Elasticsearch. So we're gonna search for the plugin name, Elasticsearch stores logs in Elasticsearch. We're gonna click on this, and we're gonna scroll down to the settings. So what is required here? None is required. Okay, but nonetheless, we need to specify two crucial elements, the host and the index. So scrolling up to the host, this is the URL of the Elasticsearch instance. Remember, it is running on localhost port 9200, and we're going to specify an index where the data will be stored. That's what we did here. The hosts, remember, it is running on localhost from the configuration and installation we have done earlier, and the index will change to not JSON this time. It will be authentication logs. So now we are ready, but there is one catch. Let's save the file and have a look at the log, the authentication logs first. So cat vr log auth and let's say head -n, print the first 20 lines. So this is the format of the log file. See, we have a timestamp first, and then there is here the IP, the protocol, and the message. Okay, so if you want to successfully and effectively extract these lines, you want to have a regular expression. So we go back to the log file or the configuration file, and then we want to use an if statement. I'm gonna paste it here under the filter. You can also use all the time use if statements inside the plugins. Oh, that's not correct. Now, this regular expression I have just copied will actually extract the timestamp, and then we're gonna save. And what's the next thing to do? We're gonna restart Logstash, if for some reason you don't want to send this to Kibana, or if for some reason Kibana is not working in the current attached machine, what you can do, you can modify your configuration file, and instead of Elasticsearch, you can send the logs or the processed logs into another file. So in the output plugin, we're going to use a file plugin. Okay. And here we define the path. So we're going to cancel all of these lines. And this one will be path. And the path can be tools. Restart Logstash. Let's now go to the scenario room here and see if there are any questions that need to be answered. Task 3. What's the default port Elasticsearch runs on? We answer this 9200. What version of Elasticsearch we have installed in this task? When you install Elasticsearch, in the output you will be given the version. What's the command used to check the status of Elasticsearch? We actually already executed a similar command in the previous playthrough. What's the default value of the network host variable found in Elasticsearch YAML? That was the default value. We actually changed it to localhost, if you remember. Now, task 4. What's the configuration reload interval set by default in Logstash? If you remember, it was 3 seconds. Every 3 seconds, it will check into configuration files and see if there is any new configuration file to be implemented. Again, the default version of Logstash can be found when you first install it in the after the installation is finished. You will see it in the output. What is the default port Kibana runs on? We already know this. And how many files are found under Kibana directory? You will find 3. And it is asking you to stop the service because it consumes a lot of machine resources. So I'm going to do that. We don't want to tax the machine. We stop the Kibana service now. Okay. Which plugin is used to perform mutation of event fields? Mutation of event fields is a feature that is closely related to processing logs, okay, or processing events, which is the function of Logstash. So this is already answered the task, or you can go back to documentation and find the filter plugin responsible for this. These are the filter plugins, and there is one plugin named Mutate. It performs mutation of fields. Mutations are renaming or removing fields. Which plugin can be used to drop events based on certain conditions? It is drop. So here we have the which plugin can be used to drop events. Scrolling up, we have the drop. And which plugin parses unstructured log data using custom patterns? It is Grok. Grok is the nitty-gritty plugin of Logstash. It allows you to parse unstructured logs and transform them into meaningful logs. Is index a mandatory option in Elasticsearch plugin? We saw it was not, but it's recommended practice to choose an index. Look at the file input plugin documentation. Which field is required in the configuration? It was path. We already answered this. Look at the filter documentation for CSV. What's the third field option mentioned? So we go to CSV, which is the plugin responsible for parsing CSV events or logs. What's the third option? It was columns, which is necessary to extract the columns, although it's not required, as stated here. Which output plugin is used in the above example? Elasticsearch. Here. This is an example configuration file, by the way, that configures the data source to be coming or to ingest the logs from a TCP port. And here the filter it's actually telling Logstash that the logs are, or the logs format is JSON. And here the output, it tells Logstash to send the processed logs into an instance or an Elasticsearch instance running on port 9200. Task 8. If we want to read a constant stream from TCP port 5678, which input plugin will be used? It is TCP. TCP is an input plugin that is used to ingest data from a TCP port. According to the Logstash documentation, the codec plugins are used to change data representation. Which codec plugin is used for the CSV data representation? The codec plugins. Do we have this? Again, I need to check on filter plugin, but there is no codec here. But, wait. This is the codec plugins. Okay. And the codec for CSV is CSV. Task 9. Which filter plugin is used to remove empty fields from the events? It is Brown. Which filter? You can answer all of these from the documentation, guys. It's not that difficult. Add plugin name to rename the field source IP to source IP. So renaming a field or an event field can be done using the plugin mutate. So in that case, this is the syntax, but what we have to do, we have to insert the plugin name here, which in this case was rename. Rename is a parameter. Okay, that's required if you want to use mutate to rename a plugin. How to find this? Again, you can find this from here. So we go to mutate and we take a look at the settings. We see rename is not required, but if you want to rename a field, you're gonna have to use rename. Can we use multiple output plugins at the same time in order to send data to multiple destinations? Of course, we can send data to multiple destinations all at once using the output plugin. So on the output, we can configure more than one plugin. Which Logstash output plugin is used to print events to the console? It is Stoutout. So Stoutout is a plugin to print the process events right to the terminal output. Update the following configuration to send the event to the syslog server. So we have an output, okay, it's going to use the syslog plugin. So in the place of the plugin keyword, we will have the syslog plugin name, and the syslog plugin name, according to the documentation, we're going to go back to the output plugins, and from here we're going to scroll all the way down, take a look at the syslog plugin configuration settings. We're going to scroll down here. We can see there are two required options: the host and the port. These represent the host and port of the syslog server. We can send the processed logs to a syslog server. Task 11. Which command is used to run the Logstash configuration file from the command line? Logstash-f. So here, when we configure a Logstash, okay, with the configuration file, just as we did here, we have to run Logstash, okay, and then specify the configuration file. Let's do that. All right. So remember, guys, we created a configuration file under conf-d. That's the configuration file we created to ingest the authentication logs and then process them and store the processed logs in a text file under the same machine. In order to do that, we're going to have to start Logstash and point it or direct it to launch this configuration file. To do that, we're going to navigate to user, share, Logstash bin, and then execute Logstash-f and specify the path to the configuration file. Command not found. Okay. Now Logstash will run and use the configuration file we just specified. Okay. What will be the input, filter, and output plugins in the below mentioned configuration if we want to get the comma separated values from the command line and apply the filter and output back to the terminal to test the results? So here it's asking us what are the plugins that you will use in this scenario. In this scenario, we want to ingest the plugins from the command line. So the plugin that's used to ingest the plugins from the command line will have the std_in as the data source. So it's going to be the std_in, the plugin name. Apply the filter. The filter will apply or will tell Logstash that this is or these are actually coming from comma separated values. So it's going to be the filter plugin CSV, and the output plugin will be std_out because it will print the process logs back to the terminal. And that was it. There was this example in the last task. In this example, as you can see, we are specifying a CSV file as the data source for the logs. And we use the file plugin for the input. And for the filter, we used a CSV. The CSV plugin will have two required parameters, separator and the columns. The separator will tell Logstash what is the delimiter between the columns. Okay, the delimiter was comma. How do you know that? Because of course you're gonna have to take a look at the log file. You cannot just assume it is comma or a colon or a pipe. You have to take a look at your log file first. We specify the separator and we specify the columns. And lastly here, I'm gonna skip this for now. In the output, we send the processed logs or the events into another CSV file on the same path. Now what about this? Usually if statements, as we demonstrated before when we configure the Logstash to ingest authentication logs, we can use the if statements inside the filter to process the ingested logs even further. So here, if attack type, the attack type is the column, one of the columns found in the CSV file. If it equals to either SQL injection or brute force, here you can perform any actions on the logs. Just for example, an example would be sending an alert to an email or configuring any other action. Okay guys, that was it.